Hello, everybody. Happy Monday, December 12th. There goes the cat. He's not even going to tolerate 1 second of this today. Stretch. I don't know what it is when he gets off of me. I have to stretch. All right. So here we are. Happy Monday, December 12th, 2022. It is 12:32 in the morning, and I have to work at 2 a.m., so I think I might be able to get this done in an hour. Let's see how this goes. So we're going to go... just in summary, well, let's just go to You Get Nicole Young YouTube. It's already written there. YouTube site. I'm going to go to the About, and then I'm going to go to 16th Amendment Must Fall First website, which has Epic. I call it Epic 1. I'm almost done. This is going to be titled Music of the Night Media Swamp Stock Tutorial Part 9, I believe. Yes, Part 9. So it's taken quite a while to get this done. It's Understanding the Great Dred Scott Fraud of 1857 helps restore the Supreme Court's full authority to strike down the 16th Amendment as unconstitutional. So, this is the heart of everything. This is the heart of corruption that we're getting at here. Once we take down the 16th Amendment, everything should start falling into place. On our road to inevitable, sustained world peace, yay. Anyway, what I did was this is the third video on this subject, but the first video I went through and described the fraud that was uncovered when I tried to brief this case. It's considered the worst Supreme Court decision, the worst Supreme Court opinion in history, and it turns out that it really is. Once you remove a bunch of fraudulently added, like an 11,000 word fraudulently added tirade, and 2 paragraphs and 4.5 paragraphs from Daniel's opinion, on and on. Once you remove these sections, it's actually the second best penned opinion in history, I believe, after Marbury versus Madison. So anyway, that's that. So this is, today I'm going to read the last 11 pages of this writing that I did. So where it talks about the implications of this, like once we've discovered this, what does it do, and where do we go from here on correcting all the wrongs that have happened to our Constitution thanks to this fraud. So let's go to the last 11 pages. Where are you? Sorry about this. Oh, I already missed this. Okay, here we are. I'm really sorry about this. Positive implications in exposing the Great Dred Scott Fraud of 1857. One positive implication that stands out almost immediately when reading Taney's strong fraud-free arguments in Dred Scott v. Sanford. So just very quickly, the case is called Dred Scott v. Sandford with a D in it. That's the fraud version of the case. And so once I removed all the fraud sections and got the original case, I called it Dred Scott v. Sanford without the D. And it's the second best penned opinion, in my opinion. In my opinion, the second best opinion. But one positive implication that stands out almost immediately when reading Taney's strong fraud. His name is Roger B. Taney, was the Chief Justice at the time. And when reading Taney's strong, fraud-free arguments in Dred Scott v. Sanford concerning the Missouri Compromise, is that these arguments still stand strong to this day, and that Congress currently holding territories such as Puerto Rico and Guam as its own personal colonies to do with it as it pleases is in violation of the Constitution. Congress probably needs to either admit these territories into the Union as states or allow them to become independent nations like the Philippines for the good of all involved. That's what happened with the Philippines. They just became a country on their own. And as for the good of everybody involved, including U.S. citizens as well as citizens of these territories alike, whatever their in limbo unconstitutional status may be, which is what it is right now. It's just unconstitutional. We need to end that. However, more profound positive implications of exposing the great Dred Scott fraud of 1857, of which putting Congress's currently unchecked power over U.S. territories back into check is only a small part, has to do with correcting the unhealthy imbalance in power this fraud created by undermining the Supreme Court's credibility, which is the only true power the Supreme Court has. The executive branch of the government has the power of force. In other words, the military or the police force. The legislative branch of the government has the power of the purse strings through collecting taxes and controlling budgets. And the judicial branch has the power of facts, reason, and logic, or more specifically, the power of a good reputation for using facts, reason, and logic to decide issues, affording the Supreme Court the same type of respect and power bestowed upon a council of elders in other cultures. The great Dred Scott fraud of 1857 has undermined the Supreme Court's reputation and power even to this day, most likely preventing the Supreme Court from ever claiming and exerting its inherent power of judicial review over the amendment process. So judicial review means that when Congress passes a law, the Supreme Court has a power to strike it down as unconstitutional if the law goes against the Constitution. And it's a very important power because otherwise we wouldn't have, it's a very important power if it's exerted properly. And one thing the Supreme Court has yet to do, and because they've been weakened by the Dred Scott fraud of 1857, is they haven't exerted their power of judicial review over amendments. Like, that's the most important place to do it. You can't just let Congress amend the Constitution all at once and say, oh, well, so much for this, we're going to take away this right and that right and just do it this way instead. It just doesn't make sense. Because the Constitution, a correct Constitution, and all the constitutions in history, but a correct Constitution outlines the fundamental laws of peaceful self-governing. And these are like the fundamental laws of physics. They're so fundamental that you can't just alter them if you want. It's like, if the ball goes in the air, I don't like the fact that it drops back to the earth, so I'm going to change the laws of gravity because it's inconvenient for me. It just doesn't work that way when it comes to peaceful self-governing. It's like physics, and the framers of the Constitution actually listed the closest version of the fundamental laws of peaceful self-governing to date, and so we got to go back to the original Constitution. And people are afraid of that. They go, oh, there's slavery in the Constitution. No, if you watch the other, we want to go back to slavery. No, if you watch the original videos, there's no inherent right to own another. The Constitution does not state that you have a right to own another human. In fact, if the Constitution were used properly, you don't do an amendment to say the Constitution is wrong, therefore we're going to say there's no slavery allowed. That's the hoax. That's the crux. That's how That's how they first began to weaken the Constitution. And when I say they, I mean I'm talking specifically gay Nazi assholes, because if you don't know me by now, you will never, never, never know me. You have to watch other videos to see the history of gay mutation, and I'm gay, so I'm not. Anyway, enough. Let's just go on. I'm not going to get this done if I do these sidebars, but I'm just. This is what we need to do to get back to inevitable sustained world peace. When I say it's inevitable, I say we're going to get there. The only question is how long, how many deaths have to be on the way, how much corruption, how much damage is done. So that's the only question. But we are going to get there because the ball will fall down to earth once you throw it in the air. It's the laws of peaceful self-governing. So I think we're going to get there very quickly, from here at least. So anyway, the court's reputation and power, and that's once the Supreme Court exerts its power to strike down, particularly the 16th Amendment. I think that has to go first, and then everything else starts to fall into place naturally. And let's go from here. Okay, the power of judicial review over acts of Congress is not expressly stated in the Constitution. And so, too, the power of judicial review over amendments to the Constitution is also not expressly stated in the Constitution, but it is implied just as much, if not more so, as the power of judicial review over acts of Congress, an important power that was settled by the great Chief Justice John Marshall in Marbury versus Madison. In effect, any amendment made to the Constitution after its ratification on December 15th, 1791. So I want to state here that I think we celebrate a different date. I think we celebrate the ratification of the first 7 articles of the Constitution as the day, as Constitution Day. I believe it's like September 11th or something. Is Constitution Day. That's not Constitution Day, people. Constitution Day is December 15th, 1791, I believe, because that's the day the Bill of Rights, a condition precedent to contract formation, was ratified. So just another side note, and I'm trying to do this so that it's a standalone video in case you don't watch the other videos. I mean, this... You can understand this if you've had at least 1 year of law school, because the first year of law school entails the classes of contract law, torts, which, whatever. I mean, torts teaches you how to think about the law, and constitutional law and criminal law. And so if you've had these classes, you should be able to understand all these things I'm talking about. Even Marbury versus Madison in constitutional law. But when I talk about contract law, when I say it's a condition precedent to contract formation, you'll understand what I mean. But that's that's what the Bill of Rights were. So the constitutional contract. I'll explain in the very next paragraph. But I just it's easier to understand the Constitution if you view it as a contract between the people and the government. So, and the Bill of Rights. So the Constitution was not, it might have, the first 7, the offer was, okay, never mind. Let's just get going. But you'll see what I'm talking about in a minute. But Constitution Day is the day the contract was formed. And if there's a condition precedent to contract formation, there's no contract until that is ratified. And that is the Bill of Rights. So, and that's December 15th. Oh, that's coming up. I should have read this on December 15th. No. Okay, no, December 12th. December 15th, 1791, the day the Bill of Rights, a condition precedent to contract formation, was ratified. In effect, any amendment made to the Constitution after its ratification on December 15th, 1791, the day the Bill of Rights, a condition precedent to contract formation, was ratified, is just another act of Congress, except far more dangerous, because this act is attempting to change the supreme law of the land. The fact that this act of Congress has to be approved by state legislators, most of whom are aspiring to be Congresspeople, gives little confidence that this most important of all powers, the power to alter the Constitution, has all the checks it needs and all the checks intended from Article 5 alone. So Article 5 says when you amend the Constitution, either Congress or the state legislatures propose what the amendment is, and then Congress has to approve it, and each state legislator, or 7/5 of them or something like that, have to approve it. And just to show you every single amendment to the Constitution, out of all the amendments, just show you the power structure. Every amendment to the Constitution has started and originated in Congress, not the state legislatures. So that just shows you that, the state legislatures, it's not a check. It just says that it's one check, but there's more to it than that. And because the fact that this act of Congress has to be approved by state legislators, most of whom are aspiring to be Congress people, gives little confidence that this most important of all powers, the power to alter the Constitution, has all the checks it needs and all the checks intended from Article 5 alone. What I'm saying is politicians are slime holes. And to say that only slime holes and no judges are allowed in this process can alter the Constitution is not the intention of the framers. They knew Congress people were slime holes, politicians and slime holes a long time ago. There is no way they trusted changing the Constitution to legislators alone, in Congress and in state legislatures. So no way that the Supreme Court is not involved in the process of checking whether the proposed amendment and the ratified amendment is constitutional. Okay, for instance, what if Congress, which is really pretty much, they control the state legislatures to a certain degree. I mean, not 100%, but they have a big influence on them. So it's crazy to think the state legislatures are a check on Congress. Not. What if Congress wants to eliminate a right guaranteed in the Constitution? What if Congress wants to try to change our capitalistic Republican democracy to a socialist oligarchy where Congress people possess all the power? What if I told you Congress has already accomplished these things with amendments to the Constitution? Because that is what has happened. Okay? Beginning with the Great Dred Scott fraud of 1857. So the first two, I'm going to show you later that immediately after the Constitution was ratified, there were two amendments made. Well, they called the Bill of Rights the amendments when they really should be called articles because they were part of the original contract. But immediately after, in 1791, the first two happened like in 1808 or something like that. It's Amendment 11 and Amendment 12. And those two, I'll propose later, were pretty much in agreement with everybody. It was just tweaking the Constitution a little bit. It wasn't altering, a material term of the contract. And those two I leave alone. I say those two were acceptable. And then, way later, after the framers of the Constitution and all the original people involved were dead, the next amendment came, over 60 or 70 years later. Amendment 13? No, after the Civil War? When was that? I mean, it came way later. And it's just, that's a red flag right there. It's like we were running fine, people. And then you say, well, there was slavery. Well, it was on its way out. Before to end slavery, the first thing that had to happen was we had to take away an act of Congress called the Missouri Compromise. Okay, before you could end slavery, you had to take away the Missouri Compromise, and that's what Dred Scott did. The case called Dred Scott is it rendered the Missouri Compromise as unconstitutional, and you better believe the gay Nazi assholes were not having it. They had a fit the whole way. They torpedoed Dred Scott, first of all, and then that led to the Civil War. That led to Amendment 13, which really just killed our democracy. Okay, killed our democracy. Dred Scott was on its way to sustained world peace, and now we're back on track because now after the 13th Amendment, in which they completely gutted the Supreme Court powers, because the 13th Amendment claimed to make slavery illegal, and there was no way after the Dred Scott case that the Supreme Court could then come up and exert their power of judicial review over the 13th Amendment. Can you imagine, after Dred Scott had completely obliterated the reputation of the Supreme Court and their power? Right after that, well, not right after, but after the Civil War, they come up with the 13th Amendment right at a time, and they say it's to end slavery. It was just really quite a torpedoing of the Constitution, starting with this Dred Scott fraud and weakening the Supreme Court, so that the First Amendment could not be challenged. It's the absolute worst time that the Supreme Court could exert its power for the first time over the amendment process. So anyway, you couldn't do it on the 13th Amendment. Can you imagine the court, after this Dred Scott fraud was committed against them, trying to say, no, we have the power to strike down the 13th Amendment? It would have caused this, the Civil War. It would have caused the complete collapse of our country, which happened anyway. So the collapse of the country was, this way it kept us limping along, and Congress kept doing unconstitutional amendments, 14, then 15, on its way to the crown queen of all the amendments, which is the 16th. That's the one they were after. They were just working their way up to it. They were weakening the powers of the Supreme Court. Congress was all the way up to the 16th, and once they got that one, it's just been an oligarchy since then, controlled by Congress. We haven't been a democratic or a capitalistic democracy since, probably since the 13th Amendment, but really since the 16th Amendment. So they all have to come down. All those amendments have to and will. I mean, it's not even, it's just a matter of time. So what is it going to be? Are we going to do it now, or are we going to wait another 200 years of corruption and BS and world wars? It's unsustainable, so I think it's going to have to be now. But are we going to do it through how many deaths and through another civil war, or are we going to let Trump do his thing and balance the trade imbalances and get us going and make it a soft landing into inevitable world peace? Just depends, but I'm thinking it's going to be the latter. Anyway, helpful way to view the Constitution is that it is a contract between the people and the government. Capital letters, the people in capital, and the government in capital letters, where the government is made up of 6 distinct entities. All right, so this is a contract between the people and 6 government entities that I call the government. And these 6 entities are: 1, the federal legislature, which we call Congress; 2, the state legislatures, of which we now currently have 50; 3, the federal executive branch, which is headed by the president; and 4, the state executives, which are the governors, the state executive branches, which are the governors, led by the governors; 5, the federal judiciary, which is headed by the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court. This is confusing, by the way. There are some courts, like in New York, the highest court of the state is called the Supreme Court. So we have to keep that in mind when I say the New York Supreme Court could be very confusing. Actually, I think the New York Supreme Court is the lowest court. Yeah, California, you have to the names of these courts can be very confusing, but it's the U.S. Supreme Court is the federal branch, and the state courts. And some of the state courts have Supreme Courts that are the state Supreme Courts, the highest courts in there. And there is a Supreme Court somewhere. I believe it's in New York, where the Supreme Court is the first court you go to when you're filing something. Like, you go to the Supreme Court of New York, and it's like going to our Superior Court here. Like, the courthouse down the street is the Supreme Court. So it can get confusing, but it's okay. So anyway, those are the 6 different entities, but they're all the government. An offer is made to the people by the government in the first 7 articles of the Constitution. In consideration is an important word in contract law. In consideration, it's a quid pro quo, this for that. What are you trading? It's in consideration for the people getting to live under a Republican democracy, a capitalistic Republican democracy. I had a hard time naming these things. Republican versus Democrat versus democracy versus capitalist versus, but I'm just calling it, I think people call it a Republican democracy, which is what leads to the sustained world peace. So we'll see, whatever. I'm not sure what to name all this stuff. And the offer is accepted by the people with a condition precedent to contract formation. And that is that 10 amendments that ferret out the terms of the original contract that guaranteed no ex post facto laws, no bills of attainder, and no titles of nobility. So a lot of people think there were no personal rights listed in the Constitution, the original articles, but there were. There were 3 of them. They were no bills of attainder, and I'll go through that later what those are, no ex post facto laws, and no titles of nobility. In other words, sometimes there isn't a change to a contract. It's just known as ferreting out the details of what the contract is. But in this case, it was enough of a concern to say, no, we're not. No, this contract is void until we accept this the Bill of Rights, which are just really detailing what's already in the original contract. But it's an important detail, so important that unless the other side accepts it, we're not gonna. This contract is void. So that's the Bill of Rights. It says the people said, nope, sorry government, your first 7 articles we accept, but under it's almost a counter offer in a way, except it's ferreting out what's already in there. So it's really just called the condition precedent, which says until this condition is met. And once this condition is met, then the contract comes into formation. So it's unfair to say that that Constitution Day is the day the offer was made. The day the offer, it was a wonderful offer, but it wasn't accepted until the Bill of Rights was added as articles. But we call them amendments. But it's not really amendments. It doesn't change anything. It ferrets out. It puts in detail and the terms of the original contract. So the original contract had in general, it said no ex post. And there are arguments, by the way. There are some people who say, like Gorsuch, for instance, he says you don't need the 10 amendments if you're following the bill. If you follow, but we kind of do for now, because it needs to be written out. But I think he's a believer in the fundamental rights. If you're following the fundamental rights, but I think that it was good that we wrote them out because they happen to be correct. Pretty sure they were, especially the 9th Amendment. I think Gorsuch might be worried because we haven't used the 9th Amendment. If you take the 9th Amendment says we're listing out these rights that we believe are the fundamental laws of peaceful self-governing, but we don't know them all. That's what the framers were saying. There are some out there that we're positive we haven't been able to identify. And just because we didn't list them in the in the Bill of Rights doesn't mean they don't exist. So we're leaving it up to the court, the United States Supreme Court, to, in the future, if they come up, they should be able to spot these fundamental rights that we haven't listed. And that's what under the 9th Amendment. And since then, if you take a constitutional law class, it's pathetic. They don't know what the 9th Amendment is. They just throw it out. The scholars, quote unquote, the smart people who are freaking idiots up to this point. Because you should be able to. Anyway, I'm not going to go and have a big rant. It's already 1:00. I got to get through this. I'm just saying that when people file lawsuits and constitutional challenges and things, there's a certain pattern that they have to use or they've used in the past, and I just blow that whole thing up. I don't even use that. They cite, for instance, the 14th Amendment, the equality clause in the 14th Amendment, because apparently the Constitution doesn't have the equality clause. When it does, it has it in 4 different places, and I'll mention that later. So I cite those clauses as the equality clauses, and I cite. Instead of citing some known precedent or anything, if it's a right that hasn't been recognized, like the right of a child not to be hit the right of any human not to be hit, but especially a child, is a Ninth Amendment right. Because we have the Supreme Court. So the right not to be owned by another human was not specifically listed in the Constitution. So that's where the Supreme Court must come in. It's the first right. It's the first right under the Ninth Amendment. Under the Ninth Amendment, I'm pretty sure the Supreme Court should do when they strike down the 13th Amendment as unconstitutional. I think I already mentioned this. Okay, I'm repeating myself. Anyway, so the people. So this is what worries some people. Like when they this is what people call a living constitution, which it is, and the living constitution is the Ninth Amendment. All right. So anyway, when fascist Nazis, usually on the conservative side, say, "Oh, it's not in the Constitution, so therefore it isn't the right." Like, you freaking moron. On the Supreme Court especially, I can't believe it. Like, they're just moron. When that comes out of somebody's mouth, they're either gay Nazi assholes or they're non-gay dumbass morons being controlled by gay Nazi assholes. Of course it's in the Constitution. It's up to you. It's up to us as humans. It's up to you as the 9 smartest lawyers in the country on the Supreme Court to protect our rights and to identify which ones those are, because there are fundamental human rights. It's like you're trying to figure out the E equals MC squared in physics. Okay, that's what you guys are supposed to be doing. You're supposed to be the Einsteins of law and figure out what other fundamental rights are out there and ferreting them out and listing them under your powers under the Ninth Amendment. Okay, and I already suggested some, and just because the Supreme Court doesn't have to suggest them, the people can suggest them, but you have to argue them, and we have to get it right. Because if we don't, it's going to happen anyway. We're going to get there. It's going to be 100 years later, but we got to get it right, and we got to get it right this time around. And it's because we're going to get there. We're going to eventually get it right as the human race, or just annihilate ourselves or something. But we got to get it right, people. We will get it right eventually, or die, one or the other, become extinct, okay? Or just, war ourselves to death, okay, to extinction. The two parties, okay, so anyway, I'm going to zip through this because I'm not going to make it. Here we go. The 10 amendments that ferret out the terms of the original contract that guaranteed ex post facto laws ferreting out. Okay, the two parties of this contract are confirmed. It's really neat when you start thinking of it this way. Then things start emerging that show a symmetry and show how beautiful it is on a higher level. How beautiful our Constitution is, and how everybody, all other countries of the world are going to have to follow something very similar, because whatever Constitution, it's not like, oh, it's the U.S. Whatever Constitution gets hits on the fundamental human. On the fundamental laws of peaceful self-governing, I call them. But whatever ones hit closest to it and actually hit upon them are it. You can't function as a government. You'll see, financially, it's unsustainable, and you're going to have to follow, whatever. It's not following the U.S., it's following whatever the fundamental laws are, and we were the first to get there. We actually operated under them closest to anybody for 100 years, more than any other country. So that's why we're going to always be in the lead financially, especially once we strike down the 16th Amendment. We've been actually, the 16th Amendment has actually funded all these other forms of government across the world. And once we stop doing that, they're going to fail. And that's what Trump is doing when he is doing trade imbalances and he's trying to level them out. What he's doing is he's stopping us from subsidizing all these socialists, communists, whatever it is. It's all fascism. It's all different forms of fascism. It's just different stages of fascism. So when you say socialist Sweden, well, socialist Sweden couldn't stay in power unless it was getting $7 billion a year from us in the form of trade imbalances from the 16th Amendment. So this is a worldwide fraud. The 16th Amendment was a worldwide fraud. It was not supposed to happen this way. We were supposed to lead the world, not subsidize socialism all over the world from all these swamps, all these gay Nazi assholes from all these countries. Okay, that's what we have, and those are the people who are going against Trump right now. So if you're against Trump, you are for slave labor in China, and you're for fascism everywhere else. Fascism and socialism and communism, whatever you want to call it, it's all the same thing. So you either have a capitalistic democracy or you have fascism. There's no other choices. Okay, so the two parties are confirmed by the preamble to the offer. The offer is which restricts the people. The offer restricts the people and their powers. And in other words, it says it says the duties of the people, which is, these are it restricts us. It really does. It says you have to live under these laws. So it restricts the people and appropriately mentions the people, as in we the people. That's in the preamble to the offer, which is the first 7 articles of the Constitution. It begins with we the people. And also the preamble to the condition precedent to contract formation. In other words, the Bill of Rights, which restricts the government and appropriately mentions the government. I mean, they both restrict each other, but these specifically restrict the government powers and appropriately mentions the government, as in, and as extending the ground of public confidence in the government. So the preamble to what restricts us mentions the people. So in other words, the contract is already, the parties to the contract is already laid out in the preambles, the government and the people. There is some confusion historically. There is some confusion that the state legislatures should be considered the people in this contract. But that is only because it was state legislators who, being natural lawmakers and the only ones available at the time, since Congress had not yet been formed, wrote most of the constitutional contract and had to represent both the people. This is kind of half-truth because there was something called the Confederate. Oh, I can't believe I'm not remembering this now. The Confederate Congress. The Congress of the Confederate. We tried a constitution and it immediately failed because the power structures were not right and because it did not protect the fundamental laws of peaceful self-governing, specifically the right to no taxation without representation. But that was the most important one. Once we got the tax thing right and the power structure right, that held. But you could tell we actually attempted a constitution that didn't work. The Confederate Congress of the Confederate. Oh my God, I don't know. I can't believe it. I can't believe I can't remember what this is historically. It's horrible because the form over function people will automatically dismiss me, and I'm trying to get the form over function people into the fold. The form over function people will hear me mispronounce something or get something, a very superficial thing, incorrect, or not remember what our government was before the Constitution. There was one in place. It was very weak and it didn't work right. And I can't believe I don't remember that name. And then all of a sudden we lose all the form over function people. They say, oh, she doesn't know anything. And then they're gone. And it's just like, oh, it's so frustrating. Come on, people. Recognize, just recognize brilliance when you see it. I'm sorry. It's not being braggadocious or whatever. It's just telling you that anyway, okay. Let's just go on. Come on. So anyway, where was the point? There is some confusion that state legislatures should be considered the people in this contract, but that is only because it was state legislators who, being natural lawmakers, were the only ones available at the time since Congress, the current Congress, had not been formed. They wrote, okay. There is some confusion that the state legislatures should be considered the people in this contract, but that is only because it was state legislators who, being natural lawmakers and the only ones available at the time since Congress, the current form of Congress, had not been formed, wrote most of the constitutional contract and had to represent both the people and the government as they did so. So, here you are. You're one of the parties, and you have to you're a state legislator, okay, and you're trying to write this contract up, and you are both a people and individually and a part of the government because you're working as a part of the government. So you're both of these people. So at the same time. However, once the contract was formed, state legislators and the state legislatures, the legislator is the person and legislature is the whole body of people, all the state legislators, fell squarely into the government camp. This is something that's very critical, and we don't do when you're in when you're doing civics classes in high school. We need to get this straight. All this stuff civics classes are great, but they don't. I mean, we need more of them, but they need to cover this properly, and they need to cover contract law, by the way, which is the best law. This was my favorite class in absolute favorite class in absolute favorite class in law school, and the best. It's because it's the most fair of all the laws that we have established. The closest to contract law as it is practiced in the United States, or as it is taught. I'm not sure how much it is practiced now because it's so slimy, but contract law as practiced is the closest thing we have right now to peaceful self-governing. The laws they're very fair in a lot of ways. It's amazing how fair it is. It's like if it feels unfair, if it feels not right when you're doing a contract, and something doesn't feel right intuitively, there's a law out there saying there's something wrong there in contract law. It's amazing how you just use your intuition and say, fairness. And it's really good. It's a great, at least U.S. contract law is fabulous. It's the best law out there right now. It's my favorite class too. And it doesn't hurt that, what's his name? Okay, let's go. The guy who does the sum and substance lecture series. It's a gay guy, actually, but he's just fantastic. He's so funny. He's so good. I would suggest all high school civics classes or all college, whatever, you guys should all teach that. Article 5 itself offers evidence that there are two different kinds of modifications. Oops, wait a minute. Sorry. In Article 5, the people allow the government, Congress and state legislatures, that's the government, to make unilateral modifications to the contract. Unilateral is a term. I got to get through this, guys. I got 15 minutes. I'm just going to read straight through, period. No more. That's it. Okay, unilateral, this is all what these are, modifications. So let's go. In Article 5, the people allow the government, Congress, and state legislatures to make unilateral modifications to the contract. But obviously, the people are not naive enough to allow unilateral material modifications, meaning very important ones, which would be unconscionable anyway. That's another term, unconscionable in contract law. That's every one of these words means something in contract law. I'm not just spewing them out, which would be unconscionable anyway, even if they did. It is therefore strongly implied that only non-material unilateral modifications are allowed, and that the Supreme Court has the final say on what is a material change and what is not a material change in any contract dispute between the people and the government, which is what the amendment process is. It's a contract dispute involving the constitutional contract. I.e., in other words, the Supreme Court has the power of judicial review over constitutional amendments. All right. Article 5 itself offers evidence that there are two different kinds of modifications, small ones that are allowed and large material ones that are not allowed, and that for two clauses in particular, Article 1, Section 9, Clauses 1 and 4, absolutely no changes are allowed, not even small ones, until 1808. Article 5 states that the government may amend the Constitution, quote, provided that no amendment which may be made prior to the year 1808 shall in any manner, and I put it in bold, big or small, those are my words, affect the first and fourth clauses in the 9th section of the first article, end quote. Parentheses and bold lettering added by me. And in one case in particular, it is not quite obvious if it is a material term or not, but the people wanted to make sure the Supreme Court and the government knew it was definitely a material term that was not to be changed. So Article 5 follows the above instructions with, quote, and that no state without its consent shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate. Meaning the Senate is made up of 2 people from each state, no matter how big the state is. So Wyoming has 2 representatives in the Senate, and New York has 2, regardless of size. And a lot of people argue this and say, oh, why? That doesn't seem fair. And it's just like, no, it's just the balance of power, and it's perfect. And it works out very well. It works out very well, actually, if it's done correctly. Anyway, that heavy restrictions on changing the Constitution should be applied to Article 5 also comes from the fact that the Constitution, despite the common saying that it is the great experiment, is really nothing of the sort. It's the Articles of Confederation. That's what I was trying to come up with. But also, yeah, the Articles of Confederation were the true great experiment. That was the first Constitution we had that failed almost immediately. The Articles of Confederation were the true great experiment, and the Constitution is the highly refined, highly evolved result of all the mistakes and lessons learned from it. The well thought out balance of power among all 7 entities in this contract. Whenever we talk about balance of powers, we're always saying, oh, it's the, what do they call it? Checks and balances. Checks and balances. And then what do they mention in civics class? Checks and balances. Well, there are 3 branches of government, and they check and balance each other. It's like, no, they do. But the most important check is the check that the people have against all 3 of these. That's the most important one that isn't mentioned in civics class. They always say there's the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch, and that's all, people. There's no other entity involved here. It's the most important one. It's the people. So these 3 branches check each other, but then the people have a check on all 3 of these. We check the executive branch by votes. We check the legislative branch by votes. But the most important check we have is against the judicial branch. And the way we do that is by votes, again, except it's on a jury. And so we have a right to vote, and we also have a right to be on a jury, which is it's one of the first things, and I'll mention this later, we have no right, there's no right to be on a jury actually listed out. It's our 9th Amendment right to be on a jury. So right now we're practicing something called voir dire, which is voir fascist, Nazi pieces of shit who came up with this idea. It says, oh, we're going to make it fair. So we get lawyers to come in and pick and choose the jury. So we can knock you off the jury just because you're black, which is still happening, people. Slavery was not taken out. We still have slavery, people, because you're knocked off a jury. The most important voting you're going to do. You can knock out voting in elections all you want. The most important vote as a person is when you get on a jury, because that's changing laws. That's deciding who's guilty, but it's also changing laws because anyway. So that vote is gone. And that is not mentioned when you say checks and balances. There is no check on our judiciary. There's no check because the people don't vote. The people don't vote. The lawyers from both sides, the government decides who gets to be on the jury. So we do have a fundamental 9th Amendment right to be on a jury. So voir dire needs to go, people. It needs to be a true cross-section of the population, and whoever can vote can be on a jury, and you're not allowed to knock them off the jury just because they're black, which is exactly what happens, or just because Google has given you information that they're a certain political leaning. That's what they're doing now, by the way. That's what the slime holes are doing. They pay Google, they pay Facebook, they pay these people. Not anymore, but maybe they do. The DMV does, or the swamps go through the DMV and then that's how they rig the juries. They just have a complete profile on every person who's on Facebook, on Google, on any of these, and then you could rig the jury that way. You could say what their political leanings are, and then you give that information to the swamp hole lawyers who go in and pick and choose their jury. And I've had so much evidence of this happening on my cases, so much. It's like the statistics of what comes up on my jury pools are just it's just not, it's statistically proven just on my cases that it's highly unlikely that the juries that were not rigged. They were absolutely rigged every time. That heavy restrictions on changing, so no state, so that heavy restrictions on changing the Constitution, the well thought out balance, so the people and the 6 parts. So the well thought out balance of power among all 7 entities in the contract, the people and the 6 parts of the government, are not to be tampered with lightly in trying to determine what is a material term of the contract that could not be modified. 2 things should be considered. This is me here. 1, does the proposed amendment, grant a right or power to one of the 7 entities, the 6 parts of the government, and then the people? These are the 7 entities in the contract. Does the amendment grant a right or power to one of the 7 entities that is not granted in the contract originally? Is there a new power coming up? And 2, does the amendment restrict a right or power already conferred on one of the 7 entities in the contract? So you have to see what the power structure is. And if the amendment is coming in specifically going after a power or adding a power, it is void. If the answer is yes to either question, i.e., in other words, the amendment creates or destroys power, the amendment is probably trying to modify a material term and violates the constitutional contract. At the other end of the spectrum, we do not want legislators to misuse the amendment process as just another legislative tool to try to make popular legislation veto-proof for future legislators, thereby making the Constitution look like scribbles in a laboratory notebook or a rough draft that some editor writes all over with a red pen, like, quote unquote, "Oh, we should make alcohol super duper illegal. Let's make an amendment." And then a few years later, they find out that's not a fundamental law to peaceful self-governing, and they find out very quickly because of all the corruption. And then they say, "Oh, never mind, that was a mistake," and then they repeal the amendment. That amendment, we shouldn't have had to repeal the amendment. That should have been struck down immediately by the court. So we didn't have to go through that process. And because, why? Because this... so here's a second criterion, other than asking if the amendment tries to change a material term, is to ask the question that bars frivolous or trivial amendments at the other end of the spectrum. And it is this, quote, "Is this not something that Congress could accomplish with just an act without an amendment?" So they could have just written an act that says alcohol is illegal throughout the entire country. And they could have accomplished that. And then they could have found out through practice or through arguments at the Supreme Court, if anybody wants to challenge that law, whatever it is, they would find out that way whether this was a correct law or not. Not through an amendment, which is impossible to change, which is very difficult to change. So you're using the amendment process to make something super veto-proof just makes it that much harder to undo it if it's the incorrect law, like the 16th Amendment. That needs to go, and it's taken 100 years of corruption to figure it out. A cursory pass over the first few amendments using these criteria briefly suggests the following outline notations. Should the Supreme Court assert its rightful powers to review all of them? And they should, because the 125. Oh, I'm going to go. So we're going to do it very quickly, supposedly. And these are things that I've been saying that I've developed in law school and before law school and just through experience and going through the criminal justice system with 5 false arrests and over a year of jail time. So together, through all those 5 arrests, I've had a year total of jail time. And I've spent every holiday in jail except Martin Luther King holiday. So let's just knock on wood for some wood somewhere. There's plastic. Oh, here's wood. It's a little plank I have for the cat so that he could walk through the car very easily. It's a wooden plank. But hopefully, I believe it's MLK looking over me, and the black people will have a fit over this. But it's just like I had an argument in one of my Nicoliokis to let me use the word boo because, and it's the same. Let me have Martin Luther King, please. It's the only holiday I didn't spend in jail, and I believe it's not an accident. I think he's protecting me. He says a lot of great stuff. And I like him. And I think he likes me. So anyway, we'll see. But I am personally more of a Malcolm X type. I mean, there would be no Martin Luther King if there were no Malcolm X. Because this black people crack up when I say this one. If Malcolm X comes out and scares the crap out of white people. So here comes Malcolm X, and all the white people are afraid of him like crazy. So then here comes Martin Luther King, and they all run to him. They all run to Martin Luther. All the white people, please, Martin Luther King, protect us from Malcolm X, because he was peaceful, more peaceful. And so anyway, all the white people ran to Martin Luther King, and with open arms. So there would be no Martin Luther King probably, unless there was a Malcolm X to compare. So there would be no. I feel like I'm Malcolm X. I feel like I scare people to run to something more logical, maybe. But I'm more, yeah. So anyway, we'll see. I don't know. So Anyway, okay. Amendment 11. The Supreme Court does not want. This is what happened in Amendment 11, which happened the framers of the Constitution were there at the time, pretty much. So this is what happens, but we've misinterpreted it since. The Supreme Court, this is what happened. The Supreme Court did not want original jurisdiction over cases between citizens of one state and the government of another state. Like, I'm a citizen and I want to sue a state. I'm a citizen of California and I want to sue the state of Arizona for some reason. Okay, so the Constitution says that if this happens, the Supreme Court itself, when it says original jurisdiction, it means the Supreme Court becomes like the first court, like your court down the street. They actually hear the case. They sit up there like a judge in a regular case and hear the case. It's called original jurisdiction. It's not a review of the cases beneath it, but it's original jurisdiction, and it takes a long time to run a case. You have to get jurors, and you have to do all this stuff, and doing trials takes a long time. So the Supreme Court, this clogged up the Supreme Court so much. Very early on, they discovered that the Supreme Court did not want original jurisdiction over those cases anymore. It was just too much. Between the framers, when they did this, they were trying to make sure that there was no unfair stuff going on. So that's why the Supreme Court came in when it was between states, so when you see the Constitution, it lists out very specific types of cases that the Supreme Court must hear originally, as if they were a trial court, and it listed out if a citizen of one state wants to sue the government in the other state, that would be original jurisdiction in the Supreme Court, and that was just flooded. That was just too much. That just too many cases, and it just bogged down the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court very quickly realized they do not want original jurisdiction over cases between citizens of one state and the government of another state, probably because it was unnecessarily clogging things up and is not the most efficient use of the Supreme Court resources. So here's the question. I'm going to do it very quickly. It does not appear to be a material change to the Constitution. And two, it is expressly listed in the Constitution under cases for diversity jurisdiction that the Supreme Court has original jurisdiction over. So Congress cannot just pass a law to take care of the problem because it's in the Constitution. You have to amend the Constitution in this case. So it really passed both my criteria. Okay, so just very quickly, the amendment is constitutional, but only as long as it is interpreted in this narrow way. If the amendment is interpreted the way it is interpreted modernly, which is that all governments have a right not to be sued by some made-up notion called sovereign immunity, what the hell is that? Sovereign immunity is a fascist, gay, Nazi creation, people. As soon as you hear it, it needs to be thrown out the window. And the person saying it is a Nazi or a non-gay dumbass moron. So if you hear the word sovereign immunity, It's just made up by Nazis, and it needs to go. They cite the 11th Amendment, which is not what the 11th Amendment was for. It's not to create sovereign immunity. And why didn't my alarm go off? It's 1:30. What the hell? Anyway, my alarm didn't go off. That's interesting. I could have overslept today, so I'm glad I did this instead. Anyway, it most definitely violates the rule that an amendment can neither create nor destroy a right or power in that case. If they just created the power, this amendment, if it's interpreted the way it's modernly interpreted, is unconstitutional and must go. It doesn't have to go because that's not the way. Another thing the Supreme Court can do instead of striking down the amendment is interpreting it properly. And in this case, that needs to be done. So the Supreme Court either strikes down the 11th Amendment, which I doubt they're going to do because, they don't want original jurisdiction now, especially. That would be it would be unattainable to do all those cases. But interpret it. So anyway, this modern interpretation creates a new power for the government that is non-existent in the Constitution, and also takes away a First Amendment right from the people to petition the government for grievances, i.e. file lawsuits in a court of law, presumably including grievances against the government. Not presumably. I mean, that's what the whole purpose of the First Amendment was so the people can file complaints against government. Okay, those are constitutional challenges. So we could still file, you could still sue. Oh, that's the other thing is, this was meant for a citizen of one state not to sue the government of another state. And it's so far, the modern interpretation has fallen so far from the original that they interpreted it as saying a citizen of this state, of your own state, you can't sue your own state government. Where the hell did they can't, it's such a stretch. Like, it's such a stretch. That's not what it says, people. Go read the freaking stuff. Read. Okay? You just pulled it out of their asses. Okay, so anyway, so that's finally, this modern interpretation takes away a Fourth Amendment right from the people to sue the government in civil court for unreasonable searches and seizures. Okay, since the only entity allowed in any court of law to determine a reasonable standard is a jury of peers. Oh, so you do have to learn criminal law. Okay, so first-year law students. So I remember now. I haven't read this in a long time, but I remember later on you'll see, or in all my writings, I do use criminal law, like reasonable. So whenever there's a term reasonable in tort law, you have to learn criminal law, you have to learn tort law, all these laws. Whenever it's reasonable, what is the reasonable anything? The reasonable anything is the people deciding. The judge doesn't decide what is reasonable, and if they do, there's something wrong going on, which is what happens in criminal law when you appeal a case and they try to decide what a reasonable search is. That's what the Supreme Court has been doing. It's the most ridiculous laws on the planet is when the Supreme Court decides what a reasonable search is, when it's up to the people. And we've misinterpreted the Fourth Amendment, and I'm getting way ahead of myself. This is all in my websites. All this stuff I talked about, the criminal stuff is fantastic. It's amazing. It's brilliant. My interpretations, and you have to go through the system to do this. So it's once again living my best life, but you have to really pay your dues first, like be falsely arrested 5 times by the current Vice President, Kamala Harris. Anyway, I think I've already discussed this before too. It rings a bell. I think I've already discussed this. Okay, so this modern interpretation, it's taking away rights and it's giving power. So this is doubly struck down as modernly interpreted. The Supreme Court needs to and will in the future come out. They have to, because this is inevitable. It's inevitable sustained world peace, and that is a fundamental. Amendment 12. This amendment changes the way the Electoral College chooses the president and vice president, and probably best represents what the amendment process was created for, which is to tweak the constitutional contract in non-material ways if and when problems become apparent after the ratification. In this case, problems that arose in the process of electing the president and vice president. 1. It does not create or destroy any powers granted to any of the 7 entities in the Constitution. And 2. It is changing the way the elections are run in the Constitution, so Congress cannot resolve the issue with just an act. Amendment 12 is probably constitutional for changing a non-material term that cannot be changed by Congress alone with an act. So, of course, when you're reviewing this, there's going to be long, drawn-out arguments, but this is the crux of the arguments, I believe. But what do I know? There's a lot of this stuff that has to be ferreted out because these are fundamental laws, and it's not just one person's opinion. It's not a vote, and we can't put it up to vote. Can't stand that. People don't understand that there are fundamental laws that can't be voted on. You could vote on it all you want, but it doesn't make it right or wrong just because a majority of people say it is. Okay, let's vote on let's put up to vote what the laws of gravity are. Duh. I mean, it just doesn't work that way, people. Amendment 13. If the Constitution guarantees a right to own slaves, this amendment destroys that right and is therefore unconstitutional. Fortunately, the Constitution in no way guarantees the right to own slaves. And I went through this. That was the whole first 30 pages of this, okay? And that's what, and it hasn't been, by the way, that hasn't been answered by the Supreme Court yet, and they must do that. They will in the future. They have to. The framers were careful never to use the word slaves or slavery in the Constitution for this reason, and only referred to slaves the same way they referred to prisoners, in fact, as unfree people, implying they may be free someday like prisoners. That's what, there's they say that the 16th Amendment claims that that slavery was mentioned and they took it out by unfree people. No, that mentions prisoners too. And that's a count of 3/5 of the vote. If you're in jail or you're a prisoner or you're a slave or you're otherwise unfree, you're counted only as 3/5 for the vote in the apportionment. That's all it is. That's not 3/5 of a person. They say that this was that's just all fake news, people. And I'm not going to go into it. Just forget it. You either want to learn or you don't, and I can't help you if you don't. The framers were careful never to use slaves or slaveries, and they call them unfree people. They call, slaves are unfree people, but prisoners are also unfree people, and they could be black or white. So unfree people are not slaves. Slaves are unfree people, but not all unfree people are slaves. Okay, implying they may be free someday, like prisoners. The right to trade in slaves was protected for only 20 years as a necessary evil to get the Constitution ratified. But Congress certainly had the power to abolish all slave trade and therefore abolish the right to own slaves after the first 20 years. The clauses in the Constitution restricting Congress from passing laws, and they did, by the way, immediately, Congress passed a law immediately that abolished the slave trade as soon as they could, according to the Constitution. So it's not like it's not like a majority of people did not want to abolish slavery. They did. They were just taking the steps, but they had the gay Nazi assholes, and they're hard. They're worse than vampires to stop people. As you could say, I'm trying to educate non-gay dumbass morons to see exactly where the source of all this stuff is coming from. Okay, and it's like constant attacks against the Constitution. All right, but now it's coming to a head now. Okay, the clauses in the Constitution restricting Congress from passing laws granting the titles of nobility or from passing bills of attainder restrict Congress from treating one set of humans better than others or worse than others, respectively, for arbitrary reasons. For example, being white makes you a noble person who can vote and own land, or being black means you can be owned by another human and punished by them at will with bill of attainder laws. So laws saying only whites could be citizens and vote and only blacks could be owned by other humans and struck by them, were unconstitutional because we had bills of attainder and these are mentioned in the original Constitution. So it's just a matter of what your definition is. Finally, the framers, so it's there. There's no slave. There's more evidence of slavery not being a right than there is of it being a right in the Constitution, really. Finally, the framers set up the Constitution so that the Supreme Court could recognize the right not to be owned by another human as a fundamental right protected under the Ninth Amendment, once again providing evidence that there is no express right to own another human in the Constitution, and if anything, quite the opposite. With no express right to own slaves in the Constitution, Amendment 13 is frivolous, and its purpose can be accomplished by a simple act of Congress. It is therefore unconstitutional for being frivolous, except the part that says slavery is okay in certain circumstances, which it does say. 13th Amendment says slavery is okay, but only in certain circumstances. And guess what that is? It's when you go to prison. Okay, so that's and oh my God, I forgot her last name. Ava. Go watch the 13th. It's a documentary. DuVernay. Ava DuVernay. Oh my God, she blocked me so fast on Twitter. I love you, baby. She comes from Long Beach, I think, too. Anyway, Ava, I love you. And I didn't mean to insult you so badly. I came in hot on Twitter with her, and but so what? I came in hot on Kelly all the time, and she's never blocked me. Maybe she just doesn't block anybody, but I appreciate that. My muse. But Ava is my muse too. I mean, she's great. 13th. Go read the 13th. Because she has, but she, when you look at the documentary, she got it all wrong. It's all, against Trump in the end. And it's just very vague that way in the end. It's just to be against Trump, just to be against Trump. Just because everybody is. I mean, come on. You can do better than that. But the whole idea of the 13th Amendment just switching slavery from slavery to putting blacks in prison, that's the Black Holocaust. That's very successful. We're still in it, people. And Trump is trying to end the Black Holocaust, and he will end the Black Holocaust against the wishes of black people, which is fine. It's going to happen with or without him. It's just more fun. I just wish they could be involved in this, making it faster. Okay, I wish they would. Okay, anyway. Finally, the framers set up the Ninth Amendment, once again providing evidence, blah, 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 quite the opposite. With no express right to own slaves in the Constitution, Amendment 13 is frivolous, and its purpose can be accomplished by a simple act of Congress. It is therefore unconstitutional for being frivolous, except the part that says slavery is okay in certain circumstances. Such an exception is unconstitutional, since it destroys a fundamental human right not to be owned by another human under any circumstances, as protected under the Ninth Amendment. Note that this argument seems circular. The Supreme Court recognizes a fundamental human right under the Ninth Amendment that retroactively deems part of the 13th Amendment unconstitutional. But that is perfectly consistent with the idea that the Supreme Court has the supreme power of judicial review over any changes to the Constitution without a statute of limitations, meaning they could do it anytime they want, 200 years later if they want. And that this power is highly prejudicial against modification, so that amendments can and should be struck down liberally. It shouldn't be so easy to pass a law that says all alcohol is banned everywhere. This is just ridiculous, people. Okay, these are the fundamental laws of peaceful self-governing. They shouldn't be changed so easily. They actually weren't changed easily. It took the great Dred Scott fraud first against the Supreme Court to first weaken the Supreme Court, and then they had to, manufacture the Civil War, and then come up with the 13th Amendment, then the 14th, and then the 15th. It's just weakening. Every one of these is a blow to the Supreme Court and to our Constitution. And finally, they got to the 16th. So it took quite a while to get to the 16th, but they did it, and it needs to go. It is fair to ask, is anybody going to come here? We're supposed to start work at 2 today, but nobody's here yet. Anyway, it is fair to ask, what would be the point of striking down a frivolous amendment like the 13th Amendment now after so many years? Oh, did I put a question mark where there's no question? It is fair to ask, quote, I should put a quote there. What would be the point of striking down a frivolous amendment like the 13th Amendment now after so many years? That's the question. I am not African American. I don't think that term was the right term to use. I think I should use black here now that I think about it. I might change that. I am not black, but I do not think I could stand it if I were African American living under if I were black living under the 13th Amendment, where I am told to celebrate the 13th Amendment because I'm supposed to be happy that a group of powerful white lawmakers came together and said it was okay for me not to be owned by another human anymore. Really? This is not for another human to decide, people, white or black. To not be owned by another human is a God-given right, and I use God here, but I mean it is a fundamental right I received at birth that is fully protected under the 9th Amendment to the Constitution, as intended by the framers. It is not up to politically biased elected legislators to grant me this right, as if it is theirs to give and theirs to take away, if they so choose. It is up to impartial, learned scholars of the Supreme Court to state in a reasonable and official manner that humans in history have been very ignorant up to this point in not recognizing a fundamental 9th Amendment right not to be owned by another human, a right that every human was born with since the beginning of time, just like all the other rights in the Constitution, including in the Bill of Rights and including under the 9th Amendment that we still have yet to recognize. Okay? Fundamental laws, people. I'm going to get it right this time and list the right not to be owned by another human as a fundamental law of peaceful self-governing. Okay? And it must be listed by the. In addition, the main purpose of the 9th Amendment and the rest of the Bill of Rights is to, quote unquote, instill faith in the government, as stated in the preamble. So how much faith can I have as an African American if the supreme law of the land expressly grants a right to own blacks? And how much faith can I have as an African American if the same group of white legislators who ratified the 13th Amendment can just as easily ratify another amendment that says it is okay to own blacks after all? There's no faith at all. I mean, okay, I would spend the rest of my life voting legislators into Congress and into state legislators on the sole basis of them being black, since that is my only source of protection from this document called the Constitution that is supposedly meant to protect me. If the people do not have faith in the government as instilled by the Constitution, the whole constitutional contract crumbles. Okay, this is the main point. So when Elena Kagan comes and argues, well, we've lived with it for so long, so it's okay, to live with it. She had like some argument like that. And it's like, no, it's going to crumble. Here comes somebody. Okay, so anyway, our fundamental human rights that are still waiting to be recognized by the Supreme Court as fully protected 9th Amendment rights, other than the right not to be owned by another human, and I've listed a few more, I think I could add to this too, are 1, the right not to be killed by another human in cold blood, especially if that human is working as an agent of the government. So this is confusing, but it is, there's a right to, we should strike down a capital punishment, period. You have a right not to be murdered by anybody, especially the government, in cold blood. Okay, so that means no capital punishment. God, come on, people. Trump especially. I can't stand when they did this on purpose, by the way. It wasn't him, but the Nazis in the federal in the Republican Party, with their bloodthirsty gay Nazi pieces of shit, reinstated capital punishment at the federal level, and Trump just had to go along with it. It's probably the one thing that's going to prevent him from having immortality is this one thing. I told him that, and it's just he needs to end it. But he had his hands tied. I'm pretty sure. It's one thing he does not favor, but he lectures on it. We'll see. I hope not. Because then he's not the person that I think he is. The right not to be hit by another human at any age, including under the auspices of being disciplined by a guardian. It's the number one problem for blacks. They need to stop hitting their kids, period. I'm not even going to I have entire other things written on this. Okay, and these are family rights in family court, which is the last thing that's going to be done, unfortunately, because the gay Nazis obliterate the family with their freaking laws, and especially the black family. The black family is most obliterated by the gay Nazi family court laws, including they don't protect the right not to be hit by another human. 3, the right to 50% legal and 50% physical custody of a biological child. That's a fundamental right, and I've listed that one out as well in great detail in a filing in an appeal to the Supreme Court. It's already listed all out, which they rejected, of course, immediately. They just ignored it, of course, because they're idiots. And all this stuff, and it's not they're idiots, it's just they don't have the power to do any of this stuff, because in order to get to the family, the biggest swamp of all is the family court laws, which is what started all of this, is family court with me. I'm doing all of this to get to these rights, and we can't get there until we take down the 16th Amendment. So the 16th Amendment falls, all this stuff naturally starts to fall out. All these other rights start to fall into place, but the 16th Amendment is their power, their money source. Once you take away their money source, which is what's happening now, the swamps start to fall, and then we could be logical. Because every single evidence, you want evidence up the gazoo on spanking children, we have it. It's not like, we have to go out and do studies to figure this out. We know, and every psychologist and psychiatrist knows this is a really bad idea. And it's the number one cause of stress and early death and everything else. All your freaking medical, all this stuff. Okay, you're going to live longer like the Asians because they don't spank if you don't spank. Okay. And it's not to say no discipline. That's discipline. Spanking is not discipline. They're two different things. Discipline means to teach, and you're not teaching when you're spanking. Okay, you're breaking the kid. Because the right that is being protected is the right to learn self-discipline. And you cannot learn self-discipline if you're spanked. And you have a right, every human has a right to learn self-discipline as a young child. In other words, the right to make mistakes and the right to learn from those mistakes and to learn self-discipline. That will stick with you for the rest of your life. If you don't have self-discipline, you're gonna need somebody to watch over you. Anyway, okay, the right to, oh my God, I got to get to work. Okay, no. Oh, okay, here we go. The right to serve on a jury once randomly selected out of the population, i.e. no voir dire allowed, at least not as practiced modernly. And I think I might have, I thought I could have sworn I had other rights listed in here. Oh, yeah, because of the pandemic. Okay, it's the right to the right to informed consent. I actually, when I wrote this, and then this caused the pandemic, I'm pretty sure, or at least it helped it come along, because I submitted this for publication in November of 2019, and then things were coming to a head as it was, but I think this probably catalyzed that a little bit. So new rights that came out of the pandemic there's a few of them listed that aren't listed here. This is just the original from 3 years ago. I haven't refined this one. But I'm pretty sure if I did, remember I said I would change it. Another thing I would change a little bit is to say that Marbury versus Madison established judicial review, the power of judicial review, and I think it's in the First Amendment, the First Amendment right to petition the government for grievances. When you petition the government, you file a lawsuit, and that's in the judicial branch, and the people who have the final say over decisions in the judicial branch is the Supreme Court. So it's in the First Amendment right for me to petition the government that judicial review, if I have a complaint about a law, which is what the First Amendment is all about, the right to petition the government is a complaint that a law is unconstitutional. Where am I going to petition that? I'm going to file a petition in court, and the people who run the court ultimately is the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court has judicial review over my First Amendment right to argue against the government laws. So judicial review is in the Constitution. It is probably expressly, well, maybe it's not completely expressly, but it's much more so than the Nazis have made out. 155, I got to go. Okay, so I know how to clip together some videos now. I finally figured out how to do it, so I'm going to finish reading the rest of this later, clip them together, and file them as part 5. I got here comes some more people. Bye. Okay, everything's gonna be okay. Oh, cat, look at this. This is what he does now. He's coming back. Okay, now he knows I gotta go. I gotta go, cat. But everything's gonna be okay, everybody. Hang in there. Living my best life for sure. And Godspeed to everybody coming out the other side in one piece. PEACE. Bye. I'm gonna pick this right up later. Bye. Hello, everybody. Happy Monday, December 12th, 2022. It's actually almost 24 hours since the last time I was on here. It's almost midnight, so it's the other end. Without much further ado, I'm going to clip this video on the end of what I had to finish to go to work. So let's just, no explanations. We're going to start. We're going to do what we usually do. We're going to go to Get Nicole Young YouTube just to show people where you could find this on your own. They say never Google yourself. Okay, so I get to my YouTube site. Sorry, this comes up every time. The interesting thing is, just while we're here, for the longest time, I was the only one viewing anything on my site, apparently, according to YouTube. You know, I had a few views of stuff, and all of a sudden, this last week, I'm getting all sorts of views on everything. So either I'm getting a lot of interest in this stuff, or YouTube is telling the truth about my views. It's not a lot, but it's a lot more than what they were saying I had. Anyway, this is my YouTube site. I work at Target as I unload the trucks and I stock the shelves. And these are actual products that I put on the shelves. They're door mats and mats on the floor that I unloaded. And as soon as I unloaded them, I don't unload. Anyway, I saw them and took a picture because Target products. This is a doormat, likely at Target. I thought that was so funny. So on my homepage, you go to my about page, about section. And down below, there's all these links. And what I'm reading right now, I'm going to finish reading a couple of others. Just, that's it. I'm done doing this. Like, I'm on my weekend right now. It's Tuesdays and Wednesdays are my weekend. And this is going to be done. And I am done doing the Music of the Night series. It's important that I'm doing this. And it's great. I love reviewing everything. I wrote this stuff like 3 years ago, and it's good going through the review. And I like giving my comments. I think they're going to be insightful for me later too, and for anybody else, where I got all these ideas and things. But we're going to go to the 16th Amendment must fall. It's the number one goal. It's the number one thing I think Trump is trying to achieve. And this is the last part of it, and I'm going to finish this right now. Music of the Night. So yes, I should have bookmarks in here. I should have bookmarks so I can get to this. Whatever. I mean, I think I need to do a little bit of work on the what's that called? Just polishing it, I guess. I'm not interested in that right now. It's fine. If you're interested in the truth, it's solid and it's here. But the first part of this was exposing the fraud and. I don't know why I'm doing this. I'm just going to tack it on. Positive implications. I know I have to go down to the 14th Amendment. So I'm going through the amendments very quickly, briefly, to show which ones are constitutional and which ones are not, and which ones need to be removed. 13th was the last one I covered. And now I'm going to go to the 14th. Okay, so here we go. Using my criteria, which are the amendment can neither create nor destroy power. If it does, it must be struck down as unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. And the other one is if it's frivolous. In other words, can an act of Congress achieve the same goal? Then you shouldn't then it shouldn't be an amendment. It should be an act of Congress. It's just being the amendment process is being abused by power hungry assholes, which is the same as politician. Politicians and lawyers are all assholes. I mean, once we have that initial assumption, as the framers did, we can get along, actually. And it's the same with racists. And for instance, you can't be, everybody's trying to make a law saying you can't be racist. You can be whatever the hell you want. It's not illegal to be racist. It's not illegal to be homophobic, and which is all subjective anyway. You call anybody a racist just for being white. You can call them a racist. Okay, it's so stupid, these labels and names and everything. You're completely powerless. And somebody says this. Who is it? Is it Kanye? Somebody very powerful black people say, you can be racist all you want. Guess what trumps that is money. If you have money, who cares? Or whatever. I'm just saying, it doesn't matter if somebody's racist. Let them be racist over there in the corner, as long as they don't have power over your rights. Okay, so once you get rid of the 60th Amendment, once the rights are protected, racism doesn't matter. So what if somebody's racist? Big deal. The reason everybody's having fits over homophobia and racism and everything is it implies the person who is racist and homophobic and a misogynist and all this has power over your life, over your rights. Okay, if they don't have power over your rights, who cares? So, so in other words, racism will never go away. Homophobia will never go away. These things will never go away. But what will go away is these people having power over your rights once you take down the 16th Amendment. Okay, so let people be these things. It's just take away their power to have any kind of influence over your life. All right? That's what we're doing. So we're never going to get rid of racism. So just stop talking about it. And talk about taking down the 16th Amendment. All right, I'm just tired of that shit. Okay, it's actually what is being used to prevent you from getting rid of this stuff. Okay, the Nazis have been doing this since the mutation came into being. And it's all coming to a head right now. Amendment 14. If somebody says you're a racist, you're homophobic, or I don't want to vote for Trump because he's a racist. Okay, these are telltale signs, by the way. I give you some red flags. If it comes out of a politician's mouth or a news person's mouth or anybody else's mouth, okay, the person is either a gay Nazi asshole or it's a non-gay dumbass moron who is controlled by the gay Nazi assholes. Okay, and the goal for me here is to educate the non-gay dumbass morons to not be non-gay dumbass morons. Okay, so if somebody says, I don't want to vote for that person because they are a racist. Or they tell you don't vote. Like when they say, oh, I don't like Trump, he's a racist. Okay, the person saying that is a non-gay dumbass moron or a gay Nazi asshole. So you need to be aware of that. Hello, people. It's 11:54. Okay, here we go. Without much further ado, Amendment 14. We're going over the amendments, just 11. The amendments to after the ratification, after the contract was formed on December 15th. We're almost there. December. Maybe I'll end this on December 15th. Wouldn't that be? I don't try. Every time I try for numbers, it doesn't work. I just can't. You got to let the numbers happen naturally, because whenever I try to force, numbers or find numbers where there aren't numbers, it just doesn't. It's just stupid. So it's just gonna happen naturally. I'm gonna finish it when I finish it. Period. All right. It's not good starting with the yawn girl, but it happens. So all I'm doing now is just very quickly applying, very briefly, apparently. I mean, much longer arguments are going to have to be made soon. I'm just laying out the frameworks for the arguments and my sort of my 2 cents on how these things should be argued. But basically, amendments 11 and 12 could stay, and then according to me, but maybe not, 13, 14, 15, and 16 especially must go. Must and will, not even must. What am I saying must? It says like we have a choice. We don't have a choice. They will go. And they're either going to go now, or they're going to go 300 years from now, or we're going to go out of existence because we killed ourselves in a nuclear holocaust or something. I don't think that's going to happen, but I'm just telling you what's, the choices we have. These are the fundamental laws of peaceful self-governing, and we need to write them down and follow them if we want peaceful self-governing. Period. Okay, Amendment 14, and it's not up for vote. Birthright citizenship is unconstitutional because it destroys the exclusive power of Congress to naturalize babies born on U.S. soil to non-U.S. citizens. Only babies born on U.S. soil to at least one parent who is a U.S. citizen are allowed birthright citizenship under the Constitution, the original Constitution. Because at the time of the framing of the Constitution, Babies born on U.S. soil to non-U.S. citizens were considered foreigners unless they were naturalized by Congress. Specifically, Justice Daniel, in his concurring opinion, and Dred Scott quotes Vitale in his treatise. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. Vitale. In his treatise on law of nations, and this is what he writes. I say, to be of the country, it is necessary to be born of a person who is a citizen. For if he be born there of a foreigner, it will be only the place of his birth and not his country. The inhabitants, as distinguished from citizens, are foreigners who are permitted to settle and stay in the country. And there's the citation for that one. The rest of the amendment, of the 14th Amendment, is unconstitutional for being frivolous. Okay, so I'm striking down the 14th Amendment in two different parts. The first part, the birthright citizenship, that's struck down because that's creating a right or taking away a right to one of the contract parties. The rest of the amendment is going to be struck down for being frivolous because all parties, including state legislatures, are bound by the Bill of Rights. And the 14th Amendment is making a statement. It's like the 13th Amendment. It's interpreting the Constitution incorrectly, starting out. So, for well over a century, both federal and state governments have been negligently arresting people at will without a reasonable arrest warrant issued by a grand jury in violation of the Fourth Amendment. But then, unlike the federal government, most state governments go on to charge these negligently arrested people, who are disproportionately black, with felonies without a grand jury indictment, in violation of the Fifth Amendment. Trying to base the 14th Amendment on Barron versus Baltimore, instead of relying on the wisdom of Corfield versus Coriel, and I give citations, is almost as big of a mistake as trying to base anything on Dred Scott v. Sanford with a D. Barron versus Baltimore is similarly a fraudulently modified case, or more likely a fraudulent creation cut entirely from whole cloth, rife with conclusionary statements and illogical arguments that are obviously not penned by Chief Justice Marshall, and that similarly mysteriously has a title that differs from the name of the litigant. The official title of the original case on file at the Library of Congress is Barron, with one R, when the plaintiff's name is actually Barron with two R's. And the 14th Amendment is unconstitutional for changing a material term by creating a right not in the original Constitution, which is the birthright citizenship, and for the rest being frivolous. So this is very brief, but I discuss all the stuff I'm discussing here is the criminal law changes. Oh, I talk about more about the 14th Amendment here, but this is in the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment. I don't know if I discuss it here, but if you go look, and I hate when people say just go to another site. I mean, but seriously, I mean, the site to look at is just freaking brilliant. It is rightsforfamilies.wordpress.com. I filed for it's called, there was a grant proposal that I wrote that really in excruciating detail goes through all the changes that must be made to the criminal justice system, where we actually follow the Constitution according to the Constitution. It's just, we've gone so far off track. It's amazing. I mean, it's so bad. So and then we have to get rid of the 16th Amendment because it's all money that's keeping this stuff in place. It's all corrupt money that's keeping it in place. And once we get rid of that money source, and the 16th Amendment falls, all this stuff is just going to come gushing in until the justice system is run properly. But that's all. Anyway, let's go on here. It is fair to ask, where is the equality clause in the Constitution without the 14th Amendment? So that's the other thing, is the 14th Amendment is, they say, oh, we needed the 14th Amendment because this is what they state. This is the argument. Because the original Constitution doesn't apply, the original Bill of Rights doesn't apply to the states. Can you imagine who the hell who's even had 1 year? I mean, it's the stupidest statement on the planet. So once again, here's another thing. If to those of you out there who aren't in law, if a news person or an expert on constitutional law or anybody who's in a position, a Supreme Court justice, anybody, makes this statement, and it goes like this: the Bill of Rights does not apply to the states, only to the federal government. If they make that statement, they are either a gay Nazi asshole or a non-gay dumbass moron, and it's just not to be believed. It's just fake news. Okay, the Bill of Rights absolutely, in the original Constitution, applies to the state governments as well. And it's not just guessing. It's written right there. It's written in several places, and I have all the arguments for that. All right? The Bill of Rights is there. It applies to the state governments. So we don't need the 14th Amendment to state that because it's already there in the original Constitution. And the other thing people say we needed the 14th Amendment because there was no equality clauses in the original Constitution. They didn't say people had to be equal there. They're a bunch of racist assholes. That's what the fucking Nazis, that's what the racist assholes say. The racist assholes say they call the other people, and that's what the gay Nazis do this very well. It's rule number 3 in the gay Nazi asshole playbook is to accuse everybody else of the thing you are most guilty of. You accuse the other person very harshly, and they do this very well. They've been doing it forever. So anyway, it is fair to ask, where is the equality clause in the Constitution without the 14th Amendment? Well, it is. As alluded to above, the equality clauses, there are 2. There are actually 4, but the equality clauses, there are 2, state that no citizen can be targeted to be treated better than any other citizen. No titles of nobility that give only one class the right to vote and the right to own property. So when you say no titles of nobility, that means you can't have a noble class. And the noble class in England means only nobility have the right to vote and own property. Only nobility can do that. So no titles of nobility, not just the title. When they say no titles of nobility, they're not talking about just the title sir and this and that. You could call anybody whatever you want. They're talking about nobility in general, meaning you can't say certain people can vote and certain people can't. Everybody gets these rights. Okay, so it's equality. Okay, and the other one is no citizen can be targeted, be treated worse than any others, which is no bills of attainders, stating blacks can be punished just for being black, etc. That's an example. These are examples of titles of, okay. Together, these clauses make up the equality clause. Oh, there goes the cops. I used to be really apprehensive every time I see a police officer, but I've changed my mind since being here in Burbank and in LA. Especially, they come by and they ask me if I'm okay sometimes. I get the feeling they're protecting me more than anything. I mean, I'm always, after you've been falsely arrested 5 times, it becomes, almost like PTSD every time you see a police officer or anytime there's a knock on your door. But lately, I'm glad for it, especially LAPD and Burbank. I mean, the cops have had, anyway. I hope that's you, Trump. I hope that's you, boss man, because he has in the art of the deal, which I read a long time ago. I was really impressed by him decades ago, because I just happened to. My mom always had these books that she would get at garage sales and things, and randomly she wasn't a big book person, but she kind of was in a way where they would just be randomly on her shelf. And, I got bored one time or whatever, and I just picked it off the shelf. And one of them was The Art of the Deal. And I didn't search it out. I didn't say, oh, I like that Trump, and go buy it. It was just on my mom's bookshelf. And I didn't even know the name Trump at the time. I just saw this, whatever, Trump, and read it. And it was great. It's just like contract law. I loved it. In The Art of the Deal, he says, when you go into a deal, you have to figure out before you get into the deal what you want versus what you need. And I told Trump, look, I'm not asking for much in life. I'm doing all this stuff. I'm giving, I'm helping you out, I think. I call him boss man, and I try to help him out. But in return, this is what I need in any kind of a deal I have with him. I don't have any deal. But the deal is I'm not going to be mad at you for the next 2,000 years. I think I'm Hamilton and he's Washington. I'm his best advisor. I came back as Hamilton. I came back as me and he came back as him, but and anyway, because my birthday is the same as Hamilton, but his birthday isn't the same as Washington. His birthday is the same as my gay baby daddy, which cracks me up. That cracks me up more than anything. I call that dead people humor. I'm just saying Trump to Trump. I said this a long time ago. This is what I need. I don't need anything else in life except, please, I don't want to be arrested again. Like, seriously. I could deal with it, because you have to deal with it, but I just really, really, really don't want to be arrested. If the dead people want me arrested, I'm going to be, regardless of what Trump does. If they don't want me arrested, I'm not going to be arrested regardless of what Trump does. But there are some things in life that are arbitrary to them, I believe. I believe some things they could give or take and they don't care. There are some things that have to be done and some things that don't have to be done. But in this case, if it's arbitrary, I'm asking Trump, if you have any freaking power, an ounce of it, just make sure, and I'm not talking about I'm arrested and then I get out of jail. I'm saying don't have a fucking cop put another fucking handcuff on me. Okay? Ever again. I mean, unless I seriously, no, ever again. I mean, unless I murder, whatever. I'm not going to break any laws. I'm not going to break any anyway, just don't have me arrested. Okay? Don't have me arrested. I'm not doing anything illegal under the Constitution. Let's just put it that way. Okay, as long as I'm not doing anything illegal under the original Constitution, don't have me freaking arrested. And I'm never going to do anything that isn't under the original Constitution. Okay, just I don't want to be arrested again. Just make that happen. That's what I need in any deal. And you say, well, what is the deal at my end? The deal at my end is I'm not going to be pissed off at you for the next 1,000 years. Okay, okay. And I'm going to be instead loyal to you. Do you get it? Okay, that's all. I don't know what else to say. I have nothing to give him in return except my loyalty. And that's very important to him. That's the most important thing to him, actually. So, yeah. So don't have me arrested. And that's why the cop went by. Okay, so I still have a little bit of apprehension because I'm not sure, but it's a lot lower in that I'm starting more to view them as protectors. When they start driving by, I start to think, thank you, you're here protecting me specifically. Like not just me as I think they know about me and they're here to protect me from other people, I think. I just get that feeling. There was a cop that came by while I was brushing my teeth in the Target parking lot. And I thought, this is it. They're coming to arrest me. And he was the nicest LAPD. It was like, it gave me more faith in the cops. But he was like, there's a certain way cops talk to you and you can tell they're fucking Nazi assholes. Most cops are gay Nazi assholes. And you could tell from the way they talk to you. But this guy was like, LAPD, you need to hire them. Actually, he's going to be hired by CHP. Most of the best cops at the local level go up to the state level. State troopers and state cops, I find, are way better than local police. I think they're screened for being the better cops. Because I found CHP and the state troopers and as a trucker were just way better level of cops. Okay, to me. That's just my own experience. But maybe other people, of course, blacks will have a different experience possibly. But mostly, if you're having a bad experience, it's a gay cop. Just letting you know, black people. Okay? It's a gay white Nazi asshole usually. Or a non-gay dumbass moron influenced by them. Or they were definitely spanked as kids. But anyway, I'm just saying that the cop came by and I had a mouthful of toothpaste and I just started spitting it out and I felt embarrassed. But he says, I'm just checking on you. You okay? He says, you sleep in the car here? And I say, well, I don't want to say that because I'm not sure if it's legal or not. But they know where I sleep just before work over there. But he was just very nice. And I felt like more protected by him than him coming to arrest me or something. I felt protected. That was a very positive contact with LAPD. All right. So let's just get on with it. I'm really glad to be doing this, reading this stuff like this, because I do have these little stories that I just never told anybody anywhere or wrote it anywhere. And I just want it to come out somewhere. that I had a very positive experience with a contact with LAPD. Another one was Burbank or LA when my car conked out. That was a black guy though. Most minority cops I have no problem with. They're fantastic. If they're minority and they come, it's the white cops that I have a little bit of apprehension with. And this was a white cop who came and talked to me over at the Target parking lot. And since then, I always see them drive by, and I always feel more protected by them when I'm over there than the other way. Okay, so thank you for that, for the good cops. And to the minority, there was a black cop that came by and helped me when my battery died in the middle of the street. So it was sweet as hell. But I've just minority and I'm okay with that. Not that they're all okay, because when I was in jail, there were some minority deputies that really had problems with white people, and I don't have white guilt anymore. So now I'm like, enough of that shit. And one of them, I think, eventually, kind of, she kind of retired because of some of the stuff she did with me that I complained about. And I think I eventually had her implode a little bit. But she really hated whites. And it was just like, I don't know. It happens, people. And I used to take that because I had white guilt, and I don't have white guilt anymore. So, and neither does Trump. It cracks me up because a lot of people call him racist in this, and he's like one of the least racist white people, if you can recognize it, because he doesn't have white guilt. A lot of people if they're called racist, they take it to heart, and all the woke people, and that shows they really are racist. It's a funny ploy, people. White people out there, if you feel like there's some minority people calling you racist or whatever, and you kind of bend over, you have white guilt, and that means you are racist, because you just don't do it. Actually, it's the same with parents. Like, my mom would do this all the time. We try to make her feel she says, I'm doing my best. She would not take it. And you know what? It made us feel, as kids, it made us feel more secure when she would call you on your bullshit. Like, you would accuse her of something, and she would just not take it at all. And whether she was guilty of it or not, but in a way, it made you feel secure. Like, you would say, okay, that's fine. Then she really isn't, or you at least feel secure about it. But if a parent acquiesces to it or tries to cater to that, then you say, oh, I did hit something, didn't I? And it makes you feel insecure. Anyway, it just reject it. You have what, and I did, and I understand. I was woke. I had the white guilt. I went through this shit, and not anymore. It's just like, screw you. You don't have no problems if you really aren't. If you really, I mean, everybody is racist. That's what you say. You just say everybody's racist. Because I've been a minority enough amongst Hispanics who are not. I mean, it exists, but not strongly with them, and amongst blacks, to know that it can be used. They're just using, and I'm good for them when they use white guilt to their advantage. That's fine. Just do it. That's fine. It's just, you can't do it on me anymore. So it's fine. It means, So anyway, so Trump is not racist. He sees green. He doesn't see white. He doesn't see black. He doesn't see Hispanic. He doesn't see anything. He just sees green, which is fantastic. That's what a capitalist world is. Okay, it doesn't see any colors. It just sees green, and everybody balks at that. Oh, the greedy, whatever. No, that's the fairest way to get things done. It's the most fair society of all. Is not the way it is now under corruption, which, capitalism gets a bad name, and a lot of Nazis are trying to, second-tier Nazi propagandists. All right, enough. Let's just go on. There's Jimmy Dore and Russell Brand are the two big ones. They are put in place by the Nazis to make sure that they'll give up some of the facts right now. They're trying to get Trump people and people who are uncovering everything that I'm talking about. They're trying to channel them they're trying to channel them to make sure the 16th Amendment doesn't come down, because they think capitalism is bad. Capitalism is not bad as used in the true capitalist sense. They're trying to make sure that Trump doesn't come into power and that capitalism is bad, and they want their socialist this and socialist that. Because no, socialism bad, people. All of it. It's all fascism. Okay. It is fair to ask, where's the equality clause? There are this. Together, these clauses make up. Okay. Together, these clauses make up the Equality Clause. And interestingly enough, if all the restrictions placed on the federal government in Article 1, Sections 9, there are at least 10 of the restrictions. And all of the restrictions placed on the state governments in Article 1, Section 10, there are at least 18 restrictions. List them all out. They're listed side by side for comparisons. It becomes clear that the only restrictions included on both lists, in other words, the only restrictions placed on both the federal and state governments are 1, no ex post facto laws, no bills of attainder, and no titles of nobility. Okay, so what falls out of this are these 3 restrictions also happen to be the only personal privileges listed on both lists. Meaning the only 3 restrictions to make both lists are also the only personal privileges covered on both lists. In effect, this is the Bill of Rights of the first 7 articles, including both equality clauses. And it is obvious that the framers intended for any and all personal privileges, including those in the Bill of Rights that came later, to bind both the state governments as well as the federal government in this contract. It's been clear from the beginning. And in fact, it's so clear, it's like the framers didn't even write that part of it. It's so clear. And yet, this is where the Nazis come in. They say, oh, it's not there. It's not written. It is there. It's just, that's right there. Okay. This is also clear in the preamble to the Bill of Rights, which mentions the government, the general term used for both the state and federal governments in the Constitution. Anytime the Constitution says the government like that in capital letters, they mean both state and federal. It's used that way throughout the Constitution instead of the United States government. And that's the term the Constitution uses when it means the federal government. Okay, the general term used in the Constitution. It's just clear. There's no ambiguity in this. It's the language. There's more evidence. So when in the Bill of Rights, it says we're binding the government, not the United States government. So the Bill of Rights does apply to both the state and federal government, period. There is more evidence, but this is probably the subject of another law review article titled, I've covered this in my websites. And I hate sending you there, but it's there. It's an entire, it's all the lawsuits I filed. I already covered all this. It's actually a Supreme Court filing, actually, titled Understanding the Great Barron Fraud of 1833 helps to restore the Supreme Court's full authority to strike down the 14th Amendment as unconstitutional. There's plenty of arguments out there, and it's not going to be discussed here any further. It's all out there, people. The 14th Amendment needs to go. It's just a big piece of shit. It's just another Nazi tool. It's just another strike that they're just leading up to the 16th Amendment, but it's just another one that needs to go. Amendment 15 is frivolous because this amendment, granting blacks the right to vote, can be achieved by an act of Congress. There is absolutely nothing in the Constitution that requires an amendment. Okay? There's not, and right now the ERA, we need the right to vote. The amendment that gave women the right to vote needs to go too. And everybody's going to say, oh, that takes away the right to vote. No, it doesn't, because there's nothing in the Constitution, the original Constitution, that says women can't vote or blacks can't vote. There's nothing there that says that. You just need to pass a law of Congress to do that. And they're just too chicken shit to do that. Maybe, or not, or maybe, no, it isn't. It's not chicken shit. It's the Nazis doing this. Okay, the Nazis are giving you the impression that you can't do a shit without the amendments. And once the amendment is there, if you take them down, you're a racist or you're a misogynist and all this bullshit. It's just bullshit. Amendment 16. This is by far the amendment in most dire need of judicial review because this amendment, without a doubt, strikes hard at a material term of the constitutional contract. In fact, you can say by the placement of this material term, at Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3, at the very beginning of the contract, after formalities, that this is perhaps the most material term in the entire contract, stating, quote, representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states. And it goes on a little bit, but this is the crux of it. And the reason I cut it off there is because there are 11, and that's a lucky number. And these 11 words, which were modified and bandied about for quite some time until the framers finally settled upon them. The framers Oh, sorry, God. Oh, God. The framers managed to intertwine and sum up the essence of a capitalistic Republican democracy in one highly distilled statement, like a fundamental law of human nature. The best description of the history. Oh, I meant to say one thing before I do this. Let me read this part, and then I'm going to say one thing. The best description of the history, purpose, and meaning of this phrase and the 4 other similar phrases placing specific restrictions on federal taxing powers is described in the majority opinion of Chief Justice Melville Fuller in Pollock versus Farmers Loan and Trust Company, 1895. Probably the 3rd best written opinion in Supreme Court history after Marbury versus Madison and Dred Scott versus Sanford. Let me tell you something about this. The Barron versus Baltimore thing that I said, I remember specifically where I was in my truck doing this too. I was covering this stuff and writing this. I went to look up in the Library of Congress online the actual case, Barron versus Baltimore. And at the time, the very front page said, the very first page, the original, said Barron, B-A-R-R. It was B-A-R-O-N or B-A-R-R. In other words, it was different from the way the front page was different from the way the cases everywhere else. There was a discrepancy, in other words, between the original case in the Library of Congress as I saw it on the PDF file. And then I wrote this and I posted it on Twitter that there was a difference. And then I went back to screenshot what I saw and it was gone. You couldn't get to it. So I don't want to be, when you say this and you say, well, okay, somebody took that. There's evidence that's being taken down and of course, whatever. So here's another thing. When I did thank God I did a case brief on this one. Pollock versus Farmers Loan and Trust Company. I did it in law school, I think. Not as an assignment. I just did it on my own. But I did a case brief and I put it somewhere. Thank God it's in my files, I think. But I did it and it was fine. And I did it off of any time in law school. We had access to LexisNexis, but I never used it because I just got these cases online at usually Cornell law school or law whatever has a lot of this stuff posted. There's a lot of places online, but I went back to Cornell to look up this case and it was not the same case. In other words, it was cut short or something. And I don't know if it's a mistake I'm making, but I can't find. It just seemed like the actual case, if you look it up online, is different. Like the Nazis went online, and if you try to get this original case called Pollock versus Farmers Loan and Trust, I know what I did. I went over to Wikipedia, and I did the full case. I tried to change it. Like Wikipedia is horrible in their what they mention here. It's just Nazis over there. And if you try to look up on Wikipedia, tell me Wikipedia about Pollock versus Farmers. They completely hatchet it and lie about it. And you can't learn. So I went there and I tried to change it. And this is when all this shit came down. Like they took it down. They wouldn't let me do it. They wouldn't let me put up my case brief on it. In other words, the things that they were quoting in there were taken out of context. That wasn't the most important part of it. I'm just telling you right now that there's a lot of shit going on. A long time ago, I tried to do this at Wikipedia, and they wouldn't let me do it. I was just stating the facts, and they know these quotes. They took a few key quotes from Fuller out of context and put it as the most important part in Wikipedia. And I was trying to change that and tell them that's not what he meant when he said that, and this isn't what the main thing was. It's the 3rd best opinion written in history, but the fucking Nazis are trying to do the same thing they did to Dred Scott. They're trying to really protect it from being like. They said that So every time you have a case in history that really advances the cause, they come up with an amendment that strikes it down. So the 16th Amendment. Okay, this is what I meant to say. Whenever the Supreme Court strikes down an act of Congress in the past, and it was really important, and it was Marbury versus Madison was the first one, and the second one was Dred Scott, and the third one was this Chief Justice Fuller and Pollock. He did an excellent job of striking down direct taxation. It's just fantastic the way he just completely annihilated it. The Nazis come up with an amendment to the Constitution to overthrow the Supreme Court decision, and they can't do that. I'm saying you can't when the Supreme Court says it, that's it. It's final. You can't make an amendment to the Constitution to overthrow a ruling of the Supreme Court, which is what they've been doing. That's what the 16th Amendment did. The 16th Amendment was made to overrule Justice Melville Fuller on this, and you can't do that. And that's why the 16th Amendment was come down. But I was trying to make this point at Wikipedia, and I just gave up. I gave up on Wikipedia a long time ago. It's completely... And now Wikipedia is fantastic, like YouTube is fantastic, but it has been taken... I mean, all these things, YouTube, Wikipedia, they're fantastic potential source of information, but they've been of course, since it's a fantastic source of information, it's been taken over by the gay Nazi assholes. But they're eventually going to run out of money and have to do it right. And they are. They're like, and now they're begging for money. We can't do anything without your money. Well, suck a dick, you fucking Nazis. I'm not sending you a dime. You're going to have to, let people actually put facts up there at Wikipedia. And they're very good at giving you a broad view of things, but on the important stuff, they're shit. They went straight for... So in other words, I'm saying the Wikipedia page on this is bad. I'm saying Cornell University has put up an incorrect... Like, if you're trying to get to this case online, make sure you go to LexisNexis or you do something, because you can't get to the actual case anymore. You can't get the original case online. What they'll put up is not the real case. So be very careful, you guys out there, when you're trying to find the real case that I'm talking about as being the third best written. I'm talking about the case that I saw online when I briefed it, and I have the brief, and it shows that the brief isn't anything. I mean, I don't know what they did. It was like a shortened version of it that cuts out all the good stuff. I don't know what's on there. There's just funny business going on. So on that one, definitely go to the originals if you can. Either maybe it's changed on LexisNexis too. Who knows? But the original case, and maybe it's changed all the way back to the Library of Congress. It could go that far, because who knows? I mean, the gay Nazis were able to change an entire Supreme Court opinion that we still have, alter it, and it's in our files as the actual opinion. So who knows what they're capable of right now when it comes. So this is what I want the historic, the forensic historians to come back and undo this shit, if that's what happened. Okay. Doesn't matter what time it is. I'm on vacation and I have all the time I need. Okay, so the best description of history, purpose, and meaning of this phrase, and the four other similar phrases placing specific restrictions on federal taxing powers, is best described in the majority opinion of Chief Justice Melville Fuller in Pollock versus Farmers, Loan and Trust Company. Okay, go get the original somehow, or make sure you get the original. And I'll try to post my brief of it if I could find it again. Thank God I did that, because I lost everything else. I think I posted it on Twitter, and Twitter came down. So that might be a problem. That might be problematic unless Elon gives me back my Twitter, which he better. Otherwise, he's just another fucking Nazi who hails from the defense contractor swamp. Just keep that in mind about Elon. He's looking like he's doing fine, but it's an indication, if he doesn't let me have my Twitter back, that he's from the defense contractor swamp. Probably the third best written opinion on Supreme Court history, after Marbury versus Madison and Dred Scott versus Sanford. When this restriction on federal taxation is linked to a restriction on federal representation, and both are based on the same population metric in such a brilliant way, hence honoring the dictum that there should never be taxation without representation in a national government. It's not only a dictum. I've since said, I called it a dictum here 3 years ago. Now I call it a fundamental right. No taxation without representation. A fundamental right protected under the Ninth Amendment. Oh, that's what another thing I should add under the Ninth Amendment. At the top, I forgot to say no taxation without representation. Actually, that's not under the Ninth Amendment. It's in the original Constitution, so never mind. Of course. Okay, that's why I didn't put it under the Ninth, because it's in the original Constitution. The 16th Amendment took it out. All right. It becomes evident that this phrase is the fundamental law of human nature equivalent of E equals MC squared in physics. It's just a fundamental right. And just in case it was not clear to the guardians of the Constitution on the Supreme Court, from the placement alone of this fundamental law at the very beginning of the contract, the framers not only went on to mention this federal tax restriction later in Article 1, Section 9, Clause 4, stating, quote, no capitation or other direct tax shall be laid unless in proportion to the census. That's the same thing. They say it again. But they practically enshrined it in stone, at least as much as possible, using words alone, by making sure this restriction on federal taxation was not altered in any manner, big or small, in Article 5, stating, as described above, that the government may amend the Constitution provided that no amendment which may be made prior to the year 1808 shall in any manner affect this first and fourth clauses in the 9th section of the first article. Okay, this clause therefore becomes the only clause in the Constitution that is flagged 3 times by the framers as important. It is hard to imagine anything being more material than that. So the interesting thing is this. You know the 1908 thing? They only said the Constitution can't be changed until 1908 on 2 different things. And the 2 things were no direct taxation by the federal government unless apportioned, and the other thing was that they weren't allowed to they weren't allowed to make slave trade illegal. Isn't that hilarious? It just shows you Trump knows this, the art of the deal. The framer, here we are trying to ratify this Constitution. There's deal making going on, and they just the fucking Nazis know inherently. Gay Nazi assholes aren't stupid. They're very bright, actually. Not the gay gene makes people brighter. I think gays are brighter than non-gays, but unfortunately, some gays have been using that in a bad way instead of in a good way. In Hollywood, they make it in a good way with their drama, and they're very bright and brilliant and creative until they use it in a bad way. Okay, so gays, that's why Trump has a lot of bright gay people around him, and including Alexander Hamilton, who was gay. All right. So anyway, so gays can be very bright, but they knew, and you could see it. You could just see what's going on. Dear forensic historians, check out the deal going on. The only part of just to get this thing ratified, you had to make a deal with the devil. The fucking gay Nazi assholes at the time would not allow this to happen. They were fighting hard against the Constitution, against this clause. They were fighting hard against this taxation clause because they knew that was a fundamental right, and they just did not want that. They needed the power. They needed socialism. They needed the power to the money. The money was the key, and they said, okay, we'll let you have that, but in exchange, you got to let us keep slavery. Can you imagine that? This is the deal the framers had to make. But the framers were very smart, and they put in the 9th Amendment. They did everything they could. You could tell. Dear black people, okay, just give it a chance. Give white people a chance. For God's sakes. Stop spanking your kids. But look, I'm just telling you, there were champions trying to get rid of slavery a long time ago. Okay, and a lot of people, I would say a majority of people at the time were trying to get rid of slavery. It's just a very small minority of very powerful, very asshole, very aggressive gay white Nazis that just they're still doing it now. And guess what? They're controlling you. And, Mr. What's his name? Mr. Tobacco, Mr. Obama Tobacco. They're doing it through the tobacco masters. You better believe Mr. Obama, President Obama has his tobacco slave masters, for sure, still controlling him. He's still a slave. Okay. But now I'm looking at this now because I didn't think about this until now. This is good. I'm glad I'm going over this because when it said okay, there's only two clauses that were protected, and I didn't mention it here. Article 5: no amendment may be made prior to the year 1808 in any manner affects the first and the fourth clauses of the ninth section of this first article. And the first and fourth clauses have to do with slavery and the taxation. They were pitted against each other. That was the deal. To get this damn thing ratified, we had to make a deal with the devil, and the deal with the devil was, we'll let you keep your slavery, but you can't change this clause on the taxation. And even then, and they were hoping by that point that the Supreme Court would come in, and they did. Marbury versus Madison, yeah, it came in, and they were doing great, but we lost out in the Great Dred Scott fraud. We lost out, people. The gay Nazi assholes won that one. Okay. Anyway, it's hard. Anyway, it's a material term. The taxation was very important, is what I'm saying. And yet the 16th Amendment comes along in 1913 and swings a huge, heavy-handed wrecking ball at that brilliant 11-word equation stating, quote, the Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived, without apportionment among the several states, and without regard to any census or enumeration. And nobody says anything about it. Nobody said a thing, hardly. This is most likely because the disastrous Great Dred Scott fraud of 1857 had so thoroughly crippled the Supreme Court's reputation and the Supreme Court's power of judicial review over anything, especially constitutional amendments, that when the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments came along, all repugnant to the Constitution, yet all purposely designed to pretend to be against slavery and in favor of blacks, two subjects over which the Supreme Court lost most of its credibility in 1857. The Supreme Court had no choice but to allow these attacks on the U.S. Constitution and attacks on all Americans, especially African Americans, to stand without a challenge, thereby setting a very dangerous precedent by the time the most repugnant of all the amendments, Amendment 16, came along. This precedent is erroneously and dangerously followed to this day. And, so they just what they established under the 13th and the 14th and then the 15th and the 16th is that they're trying to establish that the Supreme Court has no power to review the amendments. And they do. So let's do it. Trump's going to help you do it. Trump knows, though. I think he's trying to do it through Congress, or he's going to do it through both. The disastrous effects of the 16th Amendment, like the disastrous effects of the Great Dred Scott fraud of 1857, were immediate, catastrophic, and long-lasting, as is evident from a graph of the U.S. government revenue from 1790 to 2015, showing that in 1910, just prior to ratification of the 16th Amendment, U.S. government revenue from unapportioned direct taxes, which are very harmful taxes that will create major power imbalances and government corruption, according to the framers, was practically non-existent, with the federal government relying, as intended, mostly on excise taxes, which is taxes on alcohol and tobacco, for instance, tariffs, which are duty taxes, and land sales. Soon after ratification of the 16th Amendment, however, there was a giant spike in unapportioned direct taxes, in other words, personal and corporate income taxes, that immediately made up over 80% of U.S. government revenue within a year or two of the ratification of the 16th Amendment, and with few exceptions has remained as high or higher to this day, where these taxes now make up over 90% of U.S. government revenue. So it was easy money that could be spent any way Congress wants. What the fuck do you think is going to happen when you take out the 16th Amendment? I mean, when you put in the 16th Amendment and take out this clause, you get corruption up the gazoo. Look at this. It's from, and I'll show you the website it's from, but here is in 1910, what is purple and yellow are tariffs and consumption taxes, which is sales taxes, which is the best way to collect taxes on people because it really taxes the rich. If you buy a yacht, you're going to pay a huge amount of taxes. But if you buy food, you don't get taxed at all. Because the other thing is on sales taxes, you notice there's no sales tax on food. There's no sales tax allowed on stuff that's a necessity. All right? So you should be able to live without paying any taxes to the federal government at all. And that's what, if you want. Because you could move to, Anyway, if you choose, but then you don't get to live in society that has a police. Well, that's local taxes, actually. Yeah. Well, you do, because the state. Never mind. It's very. Never mind. Okay. No. I discussed this elsewhere, but here's the graph that happened in 1910. Here comes the 16th Amendment, and boom, everything is now income taxes. Income taxes, the red. And blue, Social Security is also an income tax. So you're going to say, well, you need Social Security. Well, not by force. There's other things that could come in play. This is just very corrupt. Most of your money when you get paid should be paid in state taxes. If you want the income taxes, it should be paid by the states, not by people's income. All right. Corporate tax. Anyway, this deep purple right here. What am I doing? How come you can't see this deep purple should be most of it excise taxes. And also, what is the yellow? Tariffs. This should be like this. See the purple, the deep purple and the yellow in 1910? With very little other stuff, that should be 80%. This should be 90% of the federal government income. And Trump is working on the tariffs part, making that a lot bigger. And see this little line right here? So he doesn't say how much was in the treasury. Like he collected a shitload and I think the stuff he collected before the pandemic, the fake pandemic, I think the stuff he collected was enough to get us through the pandemic. He collected so much money from China on tariffs. He says tens of billions, but it could have been hundreds of billions. And that's what they're spending now. But I think that's what kept us going through. Like, you can't shut down the economy like that. Sorry, everybody. But something happened that was not quite, it was off in a good way. It was like we shut down the economy for a year or two, and we sort of came out relatively unscathed. Where did all that money come from? I think the money came from, it was all that stuff that he had up. I'm just saying, man, once you get rid of the corporate income tax, the way he did, he lowered it. And once you start relying on this stuff, so much money is going to come in, and it's going to be non-corrupting. It's going to be incorrupt the way it's spent too. We had to spend it all on Pfizer bullshit, but it's going to be. It's amazing the changes that are going to be made in inevitable world peace. Okay, you'll see. It's going to happen in our lifetimes, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, this result is to be expected and was expected by the framers, considering granting Congress unchecked power to take all the money it wants from any American it wants without any linkage to apportionment or representation is going to be like giving Congress permission to take all the candy it wants from a candy store without personal or professional repercussions. It is proposed the corruption brought on by the 16th Amendment alone affected the entire world, with copious amounts of easy money from unprotected U.S. taxpayers being funneled through Congress and into corrupt hands at home and abroad in order to fund both sides of World War I, both sides of World War II, including helping to fund Hitler and his Jewish Holocaust, and both sides of every war since. This deep corruption most likely also brought on the Great Depression and every other economic ill since. While unchecked capitalism is often blamed for the Great Depression, the fact is true capitalism has not existed in this country since 1913, and it is in reality unchecked, unapportioned direct taxes by the federal government that is most likely to blame. It has if it has not become clear yet to anybody but President Donald Trump, who is making valiant efforts to wean the U.S. government off of underportioned direct taxes and have the federal government instead go back to relying on pre-16th Amendment excise taxes and tariffs, it will soon become clear to many that the 16th Amendment is a cancer on the entire world that must be removed. The sooner the better. It is unlikely Congress will voluntarily give up its self-granted power to tax all it wants, as has been most evident from the behavior of Congress since President Trump was elected, and has become a number one enemy of Congress, both parties, as well as of the mainstream media, both of which benefit heavily from the corrupt flow of illegally collected federal income taxes. So it will be up to the one entity with the will and the power to protect the Constitution, with full authority of judicial review over constitutional amendments, to do it, and soon it is hoped. So, this is where I'm wrong. Apparently Trump, I just get the feeling that Trump is going to try to use Congress. He's building his Congress slowly but surely. And when I say building his Congress, it's both Republicans and Democrats. I don't think he cares if it's a Republican or a Democrat. He's building he's putting, I don't think anybody who won in the last election, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, won against his will. I think he's forming a Congress so that when he comes in 2024 with the candidates he wants in place, he's going to use Congress to take down the 16th Amendment. Or a Congress in conjunction with the Supreme Court, which he's also kind of building in a way. So it's going to take both of these things together. And then he'll drop the bomb. That's probably why I can't get this thing published, because it's a little too soon. It's a little too early to drop this bomb that the 16th Amendment. Though he did say he's talking about the Constitution a little bit, but so he has a plan in place possibly. But I hope this can get published in some way, because I don't mean to put a wrench in whatever plans he has, but I don't have full faith that that's his plan. I'm not sure. I don't trust anybody but facts. Okay. So, and I don't trust anybody who represses facts for any reason. And then here's the case brief. I already read all that. Anyway, let's just get done with this. This is long. So I'm going to publish this. This is going to be Music of the Night, Media Swamp Stock Tutorial Part 9. And then after this, probably later today or even tonight, I think I'm going to go right into it. The next one, Part 10, is going to be, I'm going to read the most recent lawsuit that I filed here in Central District of California, which is in federal court. I'm just going to read that through like this. It's called, I think it's Young versus Garcetti, concerning the mandates and things like that. I filed that last March 9th. It was anyway. And then after I get done with that, the last part of this series is going to be part 11. I like that because it turns out to be 11. If it comes close to being an 11, I will force it into that. So it will be 11, but it's coming out to be naturally number 11. And it's number 11 is I'm going to read something about something I'm trying to get published about COVID-19 and the whole. I explain the entire. I don't know if I could say that here. I've said it before though, and it didn't get knocked down. But fake pandemic, and if I'm going to be suspended or taken down from YouTube entirely, it's going to be number 11. So you might not hear number 11, but you see it linked. Well, whatever. I mean, whatever. It's who knows. It's linked, and if it comes down, I'll go to Twitter, and if not, I'll be at Truth Social, and that's that. Okay, so everything's going to be okay, everybody. Hang in there, living my best life. It's really fun. I think you could see now why it's so much fun doing all this stuff. And hope everybody gets out the other side in one piece, P-E-A-C-E. Bye. Talk to you soon.